Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 11 years. 11 years since the first alien ship had answered a stray radio signal from Earth. 11 years since the shock of learning that the universe was not empty. And 11 years since humans had learned just how small and new they truly were. Compared to empires that had existed for tens of thousands of years, humans were children. Loud, curious, and stubborn children, but children all the same. Most of the older species treated humanity the way an old soldier treats a new recruit, with a mixture of pity and mild irritation. Humans had no massive fleets. They had no ancient bloodlines of conquest. They had barely finished exploring their own solar system before they were thrown into a galaxy already carved up by empires far older and far stronger than they could imagine. The general opinion among the great powers was simple. Humans were harmless. Humans were weak. Humans would learn their place soon enough. Captain Mara Solane had heard that opinion more times than she could count, usually spoken with a polite smile by some alien diplomat who did not think she understood the insult hidden inside the compliment. She never argued. She simply nodded, said something polite in return, and went back to her work. Mara was not the kind of person who needed to prove a point to strangers. She had learned a long time ago that actions spoke louder than any argument ever could. She commanded the UES Lumen, a mid-sized relief and support vessel built for one purpose: helping people. The Lumen was not a warship. It carried medical bays instead of heavy cannons, cargo holds full of food and water instead of missiles, and a crew of just under 40 people who had signed up to save lives, not take them. It was, by galactic standards, an almost embarrassingly gentle ship. Some alien officers who toured it during diplomatic visits had laughed quietly at its lack of weapons. One Vashtir officer had asked her, only half joking, how she expected to survive out here with a ship that could barely defend itself. Mara had answered honestly. She said the Lumen was not built to fight. It was built to be useful, and in a galaxy full of war and suffering, being useful mattered more than being feared. That belief was about to be tested in a way she never expected. It began with a routine patrol along the outer trade lanes near a quiet border region called the Ashfall Expanse. The Expanse had once been rich with resources, valuable planets, and thriving colonies. Now it was mostly empty, drained by decades of conflict between two of the oldest and most powerful empires in this part of the galaxy, the Krithan Dominion and the Vashtir Concord. The Krithan Dominion was an ancient civilization, built on discipline, hierarchy, and honor. Their ships were elegant and deadly, crewed by insect-like beings who moved with eerie precision and spoke in low, clicking tones that most translators struggled to fully capture. They did not fight wars for greed. They fought wars because their entire culture was built around proving strength through conflict. To the Krithans, war was not a tragedy. It was a language. The Vashtir Concord, on the other hand, was a coalition of reptilian worlds, bound together by cold logic and advanced machinery. Where the Krithans fought with honor and ritual, the Vashtir fought with calculation and efficiency. Their commanders treated war like a complicated math problem, one where the correct answer was simply the side left standing. They did not hate their enemies. They simply saw them as an obstacle to be removed. These two empires had been locked in what most star charts now called the 100-Year Silence War, a long, bitter conflict fought over a dying star system called Peridot. Neither side truly remembered anymore how the war had started, only that it had never truly ended, and that generations on both sides had grown up knowing nothing but distant battle reports and empty seats at family tables. Mara knew all of this from her mission briefings before she was ever assigned to this region. Earth's fledgling diplomatic corps had been careful to keep human ships far away from the war zone. There were treaties in place, careful boundaries drawn on star charts, agreements that humanity would remain neutral and uninvolved. Humanity's new place in the galaxy was fragile enough, without accidentally provoking two ancient empires locked in an endless war. So the Lumen's assignment that day was simple and safe. Deliver medical supplies to a small human-aligned trading outpost near the edge of Krithan territory, check in with the local colonists, and return home. Nothing complicated, nothing dangerous. Commander Dane Ortiz, the ship's first officer, had joked about it that morning over breakfast. He said this was the kind of mission he liked best, the kind where nothing happened and everyone came home in one piece. Mara had smiled and agreed. though something small and quiet in the back of her mind reminded her that peaceful missions rarely stayed peaceful for long. The trouble started 6 hours into the journey, when the Lumen's communications officer, a sharp young woman named Priya Anand, picked up a strange signal buried deep in the static of long-range scans. It was faint, broken, and clearly not meant for human ears, but it was unmistakably a distress call. Priya brought it to Mara immediately. The captain sat in the command chair, arms crossed, listening to the garbled, half-destroyed transmission as it played through the bridge speakers. It was not in a language the ship's translator recognized fully, but certain patterns were universal across most species. The rising and falling tone, the repeated short bursts, the desperate broken rhythm of someone calling for help who did not expect anyone to answer. "Can we get a location?" Mara asked. Priya's fingers moved quickly over her console. After a moment, she looked up, her expression tight. "It's coming from just inside the Ashfall expanse, Captain, right on the edge of the war zone." The bridge went quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. The Ashfall expanse was strictly off-limits to neutral ships. Crossing that border, even by accident, could be seen as an act of aggression by either empire. Human ships were under strict orders to stay far away from that region. No Matisse the reason. Commander Ortiz leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm, but there was a clear edge to it. "Captain, that signal is not our concern. Command has been very clear about the border. If we go in there, we're breaking direct orders." Mara did not answer right away. She stared at the star chart on the main screen, watching the flickering marker that represented the source of the signal. It was small, isolated, and drifting closer to a debris field that was likely the wreckage of some past battle. Whoever was sending that signal was not part of either war fleet. The pattern was too weak, too damaged, too human in its desperation, even though it clearly was not human at all. "It could be a trap," said Lieutenant Reyes from Tactical, voicing the concern that everyone else was thinking but hesitant to say out loud. "Pirates use fake distress signals all the time, to lure in relief ships." "It could be," Mara agreed quietly. "Or it could be real people who are about to die." She turned in her chair to look at her crew, the same faces she had trained with for years, the same people who had signed up for a ship built to help others, not to turn away from suffering because the paperwork said it was inconvenient. She thought about every alien diplomat who had smiled at her ship's lack of weapons, every quiet comment about how humans were too soft, too weak to matter out here among the stars. Being useful mattered more than being feared. That was what she believed. That was what the Lumen stood for. "Plot a course to the signal," she said finally. "We stay outside official Krythan and Vashtir territory as long as we can. If we can help without crossing fully into the war zone, we do it. If the signal turns out to be a trap, we retreat immediately. But we are not going to ignore a call for help just because it's inconvenient." Commander Ortiz studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He had served with Mara long enough to know that once she made a decision like this, arguing further would only waste time. "Understood, Captain. Setting course." The Lumen turned, engines humming quietly as it adjusted trajectory toward the edge of the Ashfall expanse. Priya kept trying to boost the signal, to translate more of the broken words buried in the static. Reyes kept a close watch on tactical readings, scanning for any sign of ambush. Ortiz quietly informed the rest of the crew to prepare for possible danger, though he kept his tone calm to avoid panic. Mara sat in her chair, watching the stars shift slowly on the view screen, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her. She knew there was a real chance this was nothing but wreckage and dead systems, an automated signal repeating itself endlessly, with no survivors left to save. She also knew there was a chance it was something far more dangerous, a lure meant to draw a careless ship into a war zone where it did not belong. But there was also a chance, however small, that somewhere out there in that broken, war-torn stretch of space, someone was still alive, and still hoping that someone, anyone, would hear them and come. Hours passed as the Lumen approached the border. The crew worked in near silence, each person focused on their task, the tension in the air thick enough to feel. Priya finally managed to clean up enough of the signal to catch fragments of meaning through the ship's improving translation matrix. The words that came through were broken, but clear enough to understand. Ship failing. Life support failing. Please, someone, please. It was not a trap. Traps did not sound like that. Traps did not carry that particular kind of exhausted, desperate hope in every broken syllable. Mara felt her jaw tighten. She glanced at Ortiz, who had heard the same words, and understood immediately what they meant to her. "We're not turning back," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "No, Captain," Ortiz agreed. "I don't think we are." The ship continued forward, deeper toward the border of the ashfall expanse, moving steadily into a stretch of space that neutral vessels were never supposed to enter. Behind them, safety and clear orders. Ahead of them, an unknown signal, a possible survivor, and a war zone that had swallowed countless ships far larger and better armed than the Lumen. None of them yet understood just how much that single decision would change everything. Not just for the Lumen. Not just for its crew, but for how every species in that region of the galaxy would come to see humanity itself. As the border grew closer, the ship's long-range sensors began picking up faint energy readings scattered across the edge of the expanse. Old battle debris, broken hulls drifting silently in the dark. Signs of a war that had ground on so long that entire graveyards of steel now floated where fleets once fought. And somewhere among that wreckage, according to the fading signal, someone was still alive. Mara leaned forward slightly in her chair, eyes fixed on the view screen as stars slowly gave way to the first scattered pieces of broken ships. "Take us in slow," she ordered quietly. "Keep shields ready. Reyes, if anything moves that isn't debris, I want to know immediately." "Yes, Captain," Reyes replied, voice tight with focus. The Lumen slipped quietly across the invisible line that marked the edge of neutral space, entering territory where two ancient empires had been tearing each other apart for 100 years. No alarms sounded, no warning shots were fired. For now, the war zone remained eerily silent, as if holding its breath. But that silence would not last long, and when it finally broke, the entire galaxy would be listening. The ashfall expanse looked like a graveyard. Broken hulls of Krythan cruisers drifted alongside shattered Vashtir warships, locked together in silent, frozen wreckage that told the story of countless battles fought over the same worthless stretch of space. Debris fields stretched for kilometers in every direction, twisted metal catching the dim light of a dying red star somewhere in the distance. Mara had seen war zones before in briefings and old recordings, but nothing had prepared her for how quiet it felt to actually be inside one. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something that had died a long time ago, and simply never stopped decaying. The Lumen moved carefully through the debris, engines humming low, as the crew scanned every fragment of wreckage for the source of the signal. Priya worked quickly at her console, narrowing the location with each passing minute. "There," she said finally, pointing toward a cluster of shattered hull plating near what looked like the remains of a small transport vessel. "Signal's strongest right there, Captain. Whatever's left of that ship, that's where it's coming from." Mara studied the wreck on the main screen. It was not a warship. It was some kind of civilian transport, badly damaged, drifting without power, half its hull torn away by what looked like an old battle scar, rather than fresh damage. "Life signs?" Reyes worked at his console for several long seconds before answering. "Faint, Captain. Very faint. Looks like 6 individuals, all non-human. Vital signs weak but present. Get medical ready," Mara ordered. "Ortiz, prepare a shuttle. We're bringing them aboard." As the crew scrambled into motion, alarms suddenly flared across the tactical display. Reyes straightened sharply in his seat. "Captain, I'm picking up 2 large fleet formations converging on our position. One from the north, Krythan configuration. One from the south, Vashtir signatures. Both moving fast." Mara's stomach tightened. "Time to intercept?" 15 minutes for the nearest ships, Captain. Maybe less." The bridge fell into tense silence. They had entered the war zone hoping for a quiet, unnoticed rescue. Instead, they had drifted directly into the path of 2 approaching battle fleets, likely converging on this exact debris field, for reasons that had nothing to do with survivors, and everything to do with strategic position, or old grudges. "Options," Mara said, keeping her voice steady despite the tightening tension in her chest. Ortiz spoke first. "We could retreat now, Captain. Leave the wreck, get back across the border, before either fleet arrives. It's the safe move." "And the survivors?" Mara asked quietly. Nobody answered right away. Everyone on the bridge understood the terrible math of the situation. Retreating now meant certain safety for the Lumen and its crew, and near certain death for whoever was still alive on that transport. Staying meant risking everything: the ship, the crew, and quite possibly triggering an incident that could shatter humanity's fragile position in galactic politics. Mara thought of the broken words in that signal. Please, someone, please. She thought of every alien diplomat who had smiled politely, while calling humans harmless, weak, unworthy of real consideration. She was not going to leave people to die, because helping them was inconvenient. We stay, she said finally. Ortiz, get that shuttle moving now. Reyes, keep a close eye on both fleets. The moment either one gets close enough to threaten the shuttle, I want to know immediately. Captain, Ortiz said carefully, if both fleets arrive while we're still recovering survivors, we could be caught directly between them. I'm aware, Mara replied. Move fast. Then. The shuttle launched within minutes, piloted by a steady young officer named Chen, with 2 medical staff aboard ready to stabilize whoever they found. Mara watched the shuttle's progress on the main screen, every second stretching unbearably as it closed the distance toward the wrecked transport. Meanwhile, the 2 approaching fleets grew steadily closer on the tactical display, their formations sharp and disciplined, clearly preparing not for rescue but for battle. Whatever strategic reason had drawn both empires to this exact stretch of space, it had nothing to do with the small ship of survivors drifting helplessly in the wreckage. Captain, Priya said suddenly, her voice tense. I'm picking up outgoing transmissions from both fleets. They've noticed us. Put it through, Mara ordered. A harsh, clicking voice filled the bridge, the ship's translator working quickly to convert the sharp, rhythmic Cretan language into understandable words. Unknown human vessel. You have entered restricted war territory without authorization. Withdraw immediately or be treated as a hostile combatant. Before Mara could respond, a second transmission cut in, this one colder and more mechanical, clearly Vashtir in origin. Human vessel identified. Your presence in this sector violates established neutral zone treaties. You will withdraw at once, or you will be destroyed alongside any hostile forces present. Mara kept her voice calm as she replied, addressing both channels at once. This is Captain Mara Soline, of the UES Lumen. We are a neutral relief vessel, responding to a distress signal from a civilian ship in this sector. We are recovering survivors. We have no hostile intent toward either fleet, and request temporary passage to complete this rescue. There was a pause, then the Cretan voice returned, sharper this time. Civilians in this sector are not your concern, human. Withdraw now. They're dying, Mara said firmly. I'm not going to leave them behind. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. On the tactical display, both fleets continued their approach, clearly unimpressed by her explanation, clearly unwilling to grant any exceptions to their long-standing war. Mara understood the danger perfectly. To the Crithans and the Vashtir, this stretch of space was not simply a piece of territory. It was a battlefield, charged with the weight of 100 years of grief and fury. A neutral human ship, no matter how well-intentioned, was an unwelcome complication neither side wanted to deal with. Shuttle has reached the wreck, Captain, Chen's voice reported over the comm, steady, despite the tension. Beginning extraction now. Copy that, Chen. Move quickly. On the bridge, Reyes's console let out a sharp warning tone. Captain, both fleets have altered course. They're not just approaching the debris field anymore. They're converging directly on our position. Mara's jaw tightened. It seemed both empires had decided that dealing with the human ship's interference took priority over whatever strategic goal had originally brought them here. That was, in its own strange way, almost a compliment. It also meant the Lumen was now standing directly between 2 massive war fleets that clearly had no intention of tolerating its presence. Ortiz, status on the shuttle? Extraction in progress, Captain. Chen says 2 more minutes. 2 minutes felt like an eternity, as the fleets grew steadily closer on the tactical display, their weapons systems beginning to charge, their formations tightening into clear battle configurations. Mara studied the readings carefully. The ships aiming toward them were not the largest vessels in either fleet, but they were more than capable of destroying the unarmed Lumen several times over if they chose to open fire. Captain, Priya said quietly, both fleets are hailing us again, simultaneously. Put them through. The Krythan commander's voice came through first, cold and precise. "Human vessel, this is your final warning. Withdraw from this sector immediately, or we will consider your presence an act of aggression against the Dominion." The Vashtir commander followed almost immediately, his tone equally sharp. "The Concord will not tolerate further delay. Leave now, or be destroyed alongside whatever remains you are attempting to recover." Mara felt the weight of every eye on the bridge turned toward her, waiting for her decision. She thought of the survivors still being carried carefully into the shuttle, fragile and barely alive after who knew how long adrift in the wreckage. She thought of everything the Lumen stood for, everything she believed about what it meant to be useful in a galaxy that so often valued strength over compassion. "This is Captain Solene," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm building around her. "We are completing a rescue of civilian survivors. We will withdraw the moment that rescue is finished, not 1 second before. I understand the risk. I am asking both fleets to hold fire for the next 2 minutes, while we finish saving lives that neither of your empires seem willing to acknowledge." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken tension crackling across the comm channels. Mara did not know if either commander would honor her request. She only knew that she was not willing to abandon the survivors simply because 2 ancient, war-hardened empires found her presence inconvenient. "Shuttle status," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the tactical display, where dozens of warships now surrounded her small, unarmed relief vessel, like wolves, closing in on an unfamiliar animal that had wandered too far from safety. "Almost there, Captain," Chen's voice replied, tight with focus. "Just a few more seconds." On the tactical display, weapons systems across both fleets continued charging, red indicators blinking steadily brighter with every passing moment. Mara gripped the arms of her command chair, watching as the countdown toward disaster ticked closer, wondering if her decision to stay had just doomed her entire crew. Then, Chen's voice cut through the tension one final time. "Extraction complete, Captain. All 6 survivors aboard. Returning to the Lumen now." Mara allowed herself half a breath of relief, before turning her focus back to the 2 fleets still closing in around her ship, weapons armed, patience clearly at its end. "Bring the shuttle in fast," she ordered. "Ortiz, prepare for immediate departure the second they're aboard." But as the shuttle raced back toward the Lumen, the Krythan commander's voice returned one final time, cold, sharp, and absolutely final. "Rescue complete or not, human vessel, your continued presence in this sector cannot be tolerated. Prepare to be boarded, or prepare to be destroyed." Every warship in view began adjusting position, weapons locking directly onto the small, defenseless relief ship caught helplessly in the middle of a war that was never meant to be its own. The shuttle docked with a hard clang, and within seconds, Chen's voice confirmed all 6 survivors were safely aboard. There was no time to celebrate. Every screen on the bridge glowed red with weapons locks, dozens of them, from both fleets, all aimed at a single small ship that had no real way to fight back. Mara stood from her chair, feeling the old, familiar calm settle over her, the way it always did in the worst moments. The calm that came not from lack of fear, but from years of training herself to think clearly despite it. "Ortiz, get us moving. Fastest route back to the border." "On it, Captain," Ortiz replied, hands already moving across his console. "It's not going to be fast enough if they open fire before we clear the debris field." He was right, and everyone on the bridge knew it. The Lumen was not built for speed or combat maneuvering. It was built to carry medicine and food and hope, not to outrun warships designed for 100 years of unending battle. "Captain," Reyes said, voice tight. "Krythan lead ship is powering weapons to full. Vashtir formation matching. They're not bluffing." Mara's mind raced through every option available to her, and found almost nothing. The Lumen had minimal defensive shielding, no offensive weapons capable of standing against a single one of those warships, let alone dozens. Running was pointless, fighting was impossible. Surrendering meant handing over 6 survivors to captors, who clearly did not care whether they lived or died. There was, however, one thing the Lumen did have that no other ship in either fleet possessed. It carried something built into its very design, something humanity had developed quietly, without fanfare, in the years since first contact. Something few outside Earth's own engineers knew about, because it had never needed to be used in front of an audience before now. Ortiz, Mara said quietly. Engage the Lumen's full defensive shield array. All of it. Divert everything from non-essential systems. Ortiz turned sharply, surprise flashing across his face. Captain, that includes the experimental layer. We've never tested it in real combat conditions. We're about to, Mara replied simply. The Lumen, unlike most relief ships, had been quietly fitted with an advanced adaptive shielding system, developed by Earth's scientists, after studying alien energy weapons, captured during early diplomatic exchanges. It was not a weapon. It could not fire back, could not threaten a single enemy ship, but it was designed to do something almost no other technology in the galaxy attempted: absorb and redistribute incoming energy, rather than simply block it, allowing a small ship to withstand punishment that should have destroyed it many times over. It had been tested in simulations. It had been tested against drone weapons fire in controlled environments. It had never been tested against the combined firepower of two ancient, war-hardened battle fleets. Brace for impact, Mara said calmly over the ship-wide comm. All hands, brace. The first volley came almost immediately. Dozens of energy weapons fired simultaneously from both fleets, streaking toward the small, defenseless-looking human ship at the center of their combined fury. On any other vessel, that volley would have ended everything in an instant. The Lumen's shields flared bright gold, absorbing the impact with a deep, resonant hum that shook the entire ship. Lights flickered, consoles sparked. The whole vessel groaned under the strain, but it held. On the bridge, the crew braced themselves against their stations, faces tight with fear and disbelief, as the ship trembled but did not break. Mara gripped the arms of her chair, watching the shield readouts hover dangerously low, before slowly, steadily beginning to stabilize. Shields at 40%, Reyes called out, voice shaking slightly. Still holding, Captain. On the tactical display, both fleets seemed to hesitate. Ship formations that had been perfectly synchronized moments earlier now shifted slightly, weapons powering down, as if commanders on both sides were reassessing what had just happened. A ship they had expected to destroy in a single volley had simply refused to die. The Krathan commander's voice returned, sharper now, tinged with something that almost sounded like confusion. Human vessel, explain your continued survival. Mara straightened in her chair, keeping her voice level despite the exhaustion already creeping into her limbs. We are not here to fight you. We came to save lives. We are asking, again, to be allowed to leave in peace. There was a long pause before the Vashtir commander responded, his mechanical tone carrying a hint of something new, something almost like calculation shifting into curiosity. Your shielding technology is unfamiliar. Explain its origin. That's not something I'm authorized to share, Mara replied honestly. What I can tell you is that we mean no harm to either of your empires. We only ask for safe passage. The two fleets remained still, neither firing again, neither retreating, caught in an uneasy standoff around the small human ship that had just survived an attack that should have ended it instantly. Mara used the moment to glance toward Ortiz. Status on the shield array? Holding at 38%, Captain, but it's not regenerating fast. Another full volley like that, and we might not survive it. Mara nodded slowly, understanding the fragile line they were now walking. The shield had bought them time, nothing more. It had not made the Lumen invincible. It had simply proven, in the most dramatic way possible, that humanity was not quite as harmless as either empire had assumed. Before either fleet commander could decide their next move, something unexpected happened. A third alien voice broke through the tense silence, one that belonged to neither the Krathan Dominion nor the Vashtir Concord. It was calm, careful, and clearly cautious. This is Ambassador Threll of the Idrian Compact, monitoring this conflict from long-range sensors. We request confirmation. Did that human vessel just survive a combined fleet strike using shielding technology unknown to either the Dominion or the Concord? Mara blinked in surprise. She had not realized anyone else had been watching, but of course, in a region as strategically important and heavily monitored as the Ashfall Expanse, it made sense that neutral observers from other galactic powers would be quietly tracking the situation from a safe distance. This is Captain Soline of the UES Lumen, she said carefully. That is correct. We are a neutral relief vessel that was fired upon while completing a rescue operation. There was a brief pause before Ambassador Threll spoke again, his voice carrying a note of genuine astonishment that even the Compact's usually neutral, careful diplomats could not fully hide. That shielding technology withstood a coordinated assault from two of the most powerful fleets in this quadrant. Captain Solene, do you understand the significance of what has just happened? Mara did not answer right away. She looked toward Ortiz, toward Reyes, toward every exhausted, frightened face on her bridge who had just survived something no one in this war zone had expected them to survive. She understood, slowly, that whatever had just happened here was not going to stay quiet. Word would spread. It always did. Two ancient empires locked in a 100-year war had just watched a single, unarmed human relief ship absorb everything they threw at it and remain standing. Captain, Priya said quietly, breaking the silence. Long-range sensors are picking up increased communication traffic across multiple frequencies. Krythan command channels, Vashtir command channels, even a few Idrian diplomatic relays. Everyone's talking about what just happened here. Mara exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. The Lumen was still trapped between two fleets, who had not yet decided whether to attack again, retreat, or simply stand there, in stunned reassessment of everything they thought they knew about the small, harmless species that had recently joined the galactic community. Ortiz, she said quietly, how long until shields fully recover? At this rate, Captain, maybe 20 minutes. If they fire again before that, I don't know if we'll hold a second time. Mara nodded slowly, understanding the fragile nature of their survival. They were not safe yet, not by a long shot. But something had shifted in that war zone, something far bigger than a single ship's survival. For the first time in 100 years, the war between the Krythan Dominion and the Vashtir Concord had paused, not because either side had won or lost, but because both sides had just witnessed something neither of them fully understood. And far beyond the edges of that silent, debris-filled battlefield, the news of what had happened was already beginning to spread across the stars, carried by frightened commanders, curious diplomats, and stunned observers who could not quite believe what their sensors had just recorded. The galaxy, for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, had gone quiet, waiting to understand exactly what humanity truly was. Word of what happened in the Ashfall expanse spread faster than anyone aboard the Lumen could have imagined. Within hours, encrypted reports were reaching command centers across both the Krythan Dominion and the Vashtir Concord, describing an event that senior officers on both sides found difficult to accept. A single, unarmed human relief ship had entered a war zone, ignored two direct warnings from ancient empires, completed a civilian rescue under fire, and then survived a combined fleet strike that should have vaporized it in less than a second. At Krythan Dominion Command, deep within a fortified command station orbiting their home world, High Marshal Vesic Thane reviewed the sensor logs personally, replaying the footage 3 times before speaking. His antennae twitched with something that, among Krythans, passed for genuine unease. "This cannot be correct," he said finally, addressing the small group of senior officers gathered around the display. "No unarmored civilian vessel should have survived that volley. Our own war cruisers require reinforced military-grade shielding to withstand a fraction of that output." One of his officers, a younger commander named Issa Kor, studied the readings carefully before responding. "Marshal, the human ship's shield signature is unlike anything in our records. It did not simply block the incoming fire. It absorbed it, redistributed the energy across the hull. Our own analysts estimate that if this technology were scaled up to a full warship, it could fundamentally change fleet combat as we understand it." Vesic Thane said nothing for a long moment, staring at the frozen image of the small human vessel, glowing gold beneath the combined assault of 2 ancient fleets. "And yet this ship carried no weapons of its own," he said finally. "It did not fire back. It did not retaliate. It simply endured, and then it asked, again, to be allowed to leave in peace." "A strange kind of strength," Issachor replied quietly, "one our doctrine has never accounted for." Far across the same war-torn sector, similar conversations were unfolding within Vashtir Concord Command. Overseer Kelath Vren, a senior tactical officer known for his cold, unemotional demeanor, reviewed the same sensor data with a growing sense of quiet unease that he was careful not to show in front of his subordinates. "Run the simulation again," he ordered one of his analysts. "I want confirmation that this is not some kind of sensor error or falsified data. The analyst complied, running the numbers a third time, and returned with the same impossible result. The human ship's shielding had absorbed enough combined firepower to destroy several standard Vashtir cruisers, and it had done so while carrying a crew composed largely of unarmed medical personnel. "Overseer," the analyst said carefully, "there is something else. Our long-range listening posts picked up the human captain's communications during the incident. She did not request military support. She did not threaten retaliation. She only asked, repeatedly, to be allowed to complete her rescue operation and leave without further conflict." Kelath Vren considered this in silence for a long moment. In Vashtir military doctrine, strength was measured purely by capability and willingness to use it. A species that possessed such devastating defensive technology, and chose, again and again, not to escalate the conflict further, did not fit neatly into any existing category his analysts understood. "Send a formal inquiry to compact diplomatic channels," he said finally. "I want to know everything possible about this species called humanity." Immediately. Meanwhile, aboard the Idrian Compact's monitoring vessel that had first confirmed the incident, Ambassador Threll found himself fielding an overwhelming number of urgent messages from his own government, all demanding clarification on what exactly had transpired in the Ashfall expanse. The Compact, a coalition of smaller, more cautious civilizations that had long tried to remain neutral in the endless war between the Dominion and the Concord, had every reason to want accurate information. "Ambassador," came the voice of a senior Compact diplomat over secure channel, "confirm the reports. Did a single human relief vessel truly withstand a coordinated assault from both major powers in that sector?" "Confirmed," Threll replied carefully. "Sensor logs are unambiguous. The human ship's shielding technology absorbed the attack and remained functional. The vessel itself carried no offensive weaponry whatsoever." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the diplomat spoke again, his voice careful and measured. "This changes things considerably, Ambassador. If humanity possesses technology capable of neutralizing coordinated fleet action without any offensive capacity of their own, that alters the balance of power across this entire region. We must reconsider our current diplomatic posture toward Earth." Back aboard the Lumen, unaware of just how quickly the political situation across the sector was shifting, Mara remained focused entirely on keeping her ship and crew alive. The shield array was slowly recovering, climbing steadily from its dangerously low reserves, but she knew another full assault could easily overwhelm it before it fully regenerated. "Status?" she asked quietly, watching the two fleets still hovering at a tense standoff around her ship. "No further movement from either fleet, Captain," Reyes reported. "Weapons remain charged, but neither side has fired again." Mara exhaled slowly, allowing herself the smallest measure of relief. The immediate danger, at least for now, seemed to have paused. Whatever had happened here, it seemed to have given both alien commanders enough reason to hesitate rather than simply finish what they had started. A new transmission came through moments later, this time from the Krythan flagship, the voice noticeably different from before. Less commanding, more measured, almost cautious. "Human vessel, this is High Marshal Vesic Thane of the Krythan Dominion. I am reviewing the circumstances of this engagement personally. You will hold your current position while we determine an appropriate resolution." Mara considered her response carefully before replying. "Marshal, my crew and I mean no disrespect, but we have 6 critically injured civilians aboard who require urgent medical attention beyond what our facilities can provide. I ask again for safe passage to the nearest neutral medical station." There was a pause before the High Marshal responded, his tone shifting slightly, carrying a note of something that almost resembled reluctant respect. "You continue to prioritize the survival of civilians over your own tactical advantage, even now. This is unexpected behavior for a species capable of such defensive technology." "We didn't build that shield to win a fight, Marshal," Mara replied honestly. "We built it to protect people. That's all we've ever wanted to do out here." The silence that followed stretched long enough that Mara began to wonder if she had said too much, revealed too much of humanity's underlying philosophy to two ancient empires who valued strength above almost everything else. But when the Vashtir commander spoke next, his tone carried a similar shift, cautious curiosity, replacing cold calculation. "Human vessel, this is Overseer Kelath Vren. I find myself reassessing this encounter. Your continued restraint, despite clear capability to withstand significant force, is not behavior we anticipated from a species so recently introduced to galactic affairs. Mara took a steadying breath before answering. Overseer, I understand your war has gone on for a very long time. I understand it's not something either of your empires expects outsiders to interfere with. But we came here today because 6 people were dying, and no one else was coming to help them. That's the only reason we're here. Not to prove a point, not to threaten anyone, just to help. There was a long, heavy pause across both open channels, Krythan and Vashtir commanders alike, absorbing words that did not fit neatly into either empire's understanding of strength, war, or diplomacy. Finally, the Krythan marshal spoke again, his tone measured and deliberate. High Command will require a full accounting of this incident, Captain Solene. For now, you may proceed to the border unmolested. Consider this a temporary courtesy, pending further review. The Vashtir overseer echoed a similar sentiment moments later, his tone equally cautious. The Concord grants the same. Safe passage, human vessel. For now. Mara felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, as she nodded to Ortiz. Set course for the border. Let's get our survivors the help they need. As the Lumen began its slow, careful withdrawal from the debris field, both massive fleets remained still, weapons no longer aimed directly at the small human ship, but clearly watching, studying, reassessing everything they thought they understood about the newest, supposedly weakest species in galactic society. Far beyond that silent battlefield, across command centers, diplomatic stations, and monitoring posts scattered throughout the region, the same question was being asked again and again by officials who had never expected to take humanity seriously. What exactly was humanity capable of, if a single unarmed relief ship could survive what should have destroyed it several times over, and still choose, deliberately and repeatedly, not to fight back? The galaxy, for the first time in longer than most of its oldest empires could remember, found itself uncertain, cautious, and quietly, deeply unsettled by the small, stubborn species that had just refused to die exactly the way everyone expected it to. The UES Lumen crossed back over the border of the Ashfall expanse 3 hours later, moving slowly and carefully, its shields still not fully recovered, its crew exhausted but alive. Behind them, the 2 ancient fleets remained in the war zone, watching in silence as the small human ship disappeared back into neutral space. By the time the Lumen reached the nearest neutral medical station, the 6 survivors from the wrecked transport had been stabilized enough to be safely transferred into proper care. They turned out to belong to a small, mostly forgotten species called the Orlena, refugees whose home colony had been destroyed years earlier during one of the war's earliest and bloodiest campaigns. They had been drifting quietly at the edges of the conflict ever since, trying to survive in a stretch of space that had long since stopped caring whether they lived or died. One of the survivors, an elderly Orlena named Sale, insisted on speaking with Captain Solene personally before being taken to recovery. Frail and weak, his voice trembling with exhaustion, he clasped her hand tightly and thanked her in halting, broken words that the translator struggled to fully capture. He said something simple, something that stayed with Mara long after the moment had passed. He said that no one had stopped for them in years, not the Krythans. Not the Vashtir, not even the Compact, who preferred careful neutrality over involvement. Only the humans had stopped. Only the humans had bothered to listen to a signal that everyone else had simply learned to ignore. Mara did not have a good response to that. She only squeezed his hand gently and told him he was safe now, and that was enough. News of the incident continued to spread rapidly across the sector in the days that followed, growing more detailed and more widely discussed with each passing hour. Diplomatic channels lit up with urgent messages between the Krythan Dominion, the Vashtir Concord, and the cautious, ever-neutral Idrian Compact. Analysts on all sides pored over the sensor data recovered from the encounter, trying to understand exactly what kind of technology could allow an unarmed relief ship to withstand a combined fleet assault without retaliating even once. Earth's own diplomatic corps, back on the homeworld, received the reports with a mixture of pride and quiet alarm. Ambassador Celine Okoye, humanity's senior representative to the wider galactic community, called Mara directly once the Lumen reached safe harbor, her expression a careful balance of relief and concern. "You do understand," Okoye said carefully over the secure comm line, "that what happened out there has changed how every major power in that sector views humanity. Overnight. I understand we saved 6 lives that no one else was willing to save," Mara replied simply. "That's all I set out to do." Okoye allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I know, Captain. And for what it's worth, I don't think you did anything wrong. But you should know, both the Dominion and the Concord have formally requested clarification regarding our defensive technologies. There are already talks beginning about establishing new protocols regarding neutral vessel protections in active conflict zones." "Because of one ship?" Mara asked, surprised. "Because of what one ship proved," Okoye corrected gently. "For 100 years, both empires believed their war was simply how things were. Something too old, too entrenched, too deeply rooted in grief and vengeance, to ever truly change. And then a single, unarmed ship from a species barely a decade into galactic society walked directly into the middle of it, refused every warning to leave, saved lives neither side cared about, survived an attack that should have destroyed it several times over, and never once fired back." Mara considered that in silence for a long moment, thinking back to the Krythan Marshal's cautious, measured tone near the end of their encounter, to the Vashtir Overseer's quiet reassessment of everything he thought he understood about strength and restraint. She had not set out to change anything larger than a handful of lives that day. She had simply refused to look away from suffering she had the ability to prevent. "They're calling it the Lumen Incident," Okoye continued. "It's already becoming something of a turning point in how neutral parties are discussing this war. There's talk, quiet talk for now, about the possibility of formal ceasefire negotiations. Nothing official yet, but after 100 years of silence on that front, even quiet talk is significant." In the weeks that followed, that quiet talk slowly grew louder. High Marshal Vesic Thane, still troubled by what his fleet had witnessed, found himself unable to fully return to the rigid certainty that had guided Krythan military doctrine for generations. He requested, and was eventually granted, a closed-door meeting with senior Dominion leadership to discuss the strategic and philosophical implications of the encounter. Overseer Keleth Vren, similarly unsettled, submitted a detailed report to Vashtir Concord Command that quietly questioned decades of established doctrine regarding neutral parties and civilian casualties in contested territory. It was not a popular report among older, more traditional officers, but it could not be easily dismissed either, not after the evidence recorded during the Lumen incident. Ambassador Threll of the Idrian Compact used the event as leverage in ongoing diplomatic efforts, quietly encouraging both empires toward the possibility of establishing formal humanitarian protections within contested war zones, protections that had never existed in 100 years of continuous conflict. None of it happened quickly. Ancient grudges and century-old grief did not simply dissolve because of a single incident, however remarkable. The war between the Krythan Dominion and the Vashtir Concord did not end in the months that followed. But something had shifted, quietly and permanently, in how both empires approached the conflict. Skirmishes grew slightly less frequent in border regions. Civilian evacuation protocols, previously non-existent, began appearing in both militaries' updated doctrines. Small, careful steps, but steps nonetheless, toward something that had not existed in that region for a very long time, the possibility of eventual peace. Mara Soline did not seek out the attention that followed her name across galactic news channels in the months after the incident. She found the sudden fame uncomfortable, uncertain how to respond to alien diplomats who now approached her with cautious respect rather than the polite condescension she had grown used to. She had not set out to become a symbol of anything. She had only wanted to save 6 frightened, dying strangers who no one else in that war zone had bothered to help. But symbols, she came to understand slowly, were rarely chosen by the people who became them. They were created by the moments those people refused to walk away from. The choices made when walking away would have been so much easier and so much safer. Commander Ortiz, standing beside her one quiet evening as the Lumen prepared for its next assignment, voiced something that had been on both their minds since the incident. "You know this changes things for us, Captain. For all of humanity, really. People are going to expect something from us now. Something we didn't ask to represent." Mara considered his words carefully, watching the stars shift slowly outside the viewport, thinking of Sael's trembling voice, of the Krythan Marshal's cautious reassessment, of the small, fragile beginnings of peace, quietly taking root in a war zone that had known nothing but conflict for 100 years. Maybe, she said finally, or maybe it just proves something we already knew about ourselves. We're not the strongest species out here. We're not the oldest, or the most powerful, or the most feared. But we showed up when no one else would, and we didn't back down from doing what was right, even when it would have been easier not to. Ortiz nodded slowly, a small, tired smile crossing his face. The galaxy went quiet that day, watching us. Maybe it's time they got used to that, Mara replied, a faint smile of her own forming as she turned back toward the stars ahead. Because we're not planning on stopping. The UES Lumen set course for its next assignment shortly after, a small, unarmed relief ship continuing its quiet work across a galaxy that had, for the first time in a very long while, been forced to reconsider everything it thought it understood about the newest, supposedly weakest species among the stars. And somewhere far behind them, in the silent, debris-filled expanse of a war zone, still slowly learning what peace might one day look like, the story of a single human ship that had refused to look away continued to echo across command channels, diplomatic halls, and quiet conversations throughout the galaxy, a reminder that sometimes the loudest statement a species could make was simply choosing, again and again, to help.